Welcome to Module 2. You can see the link is open on the left-hand side course menu for our Blackboard page, and you can click into there and get the Module 2 assignment sheet, which will take us through the 3 weeks of this unit. You'll also see the assignment sheet for the compare and contrast essay, as well as links to the articles we're going to be talking about, grammar handouts, MLA format handouts, things like that. So when we voted on topics, one that you guys very enthusiastically selected was death rituals. And so I figured we would do that for this first essay because it gives us the opportunity to look at multiple cultures' death rituals, and also it's the spoopy season, as my kids would say. So we're approaching Halloween. And so I think it's, a festive time of year to talk about these kinds of things. On the serious side of things, I know death can be very difficult to talk about. It can be difficult to look at death, to think about it, to spend time reading about it and learning about it, because it's scary. It can be gross. It can be uncomfortable. It can bring up our own griefs and fears, our own sadnesses. And so I know that this can be a difficult topic, especially if you've recently lost someone. Even if you haven't recently lost someone, it can be very difficult to talk about and read about and look at. But try your best to get through the topic because it's worth discussing and learning about. If you're really, really struggling for whatever reason, make sure to send me an email and we can talk about it. So this is a difficult topic, but looking at a cultural's death rituals can tell us a lot about the culture itself. If we study their death rituals and really understand them for their purpose that they serve within their culture, we can learn a lot about the culture. We can learn about its views of this world and an afterworld. We can learn what it thinks of as holy, as not holy, as how it fits the human within the universal scale of justice, of where it places us within a concept of creation. We can look at how it distributes power, right? The pharaohs of Egypt got huge pyramids. The poor farmers didn't. Even now we look at big city cemeteries. Some people have huge monuments and other people's graves don't, right? So we can look at how cultures distribute power, how they distribute reward and punishment. And anyway, so you can learn a lot through looking at these if, and it's a big if, we have to strive to understand the process by the people who practice them. So for instance, if we look at something simple like food, what people eat and don't eat to some degree is arbitrary. In our culture, we eat cows. We eat a lot of cows. We don't eat dogs, right? You go to other parts of the world, like for Hindus who would think that a cow is holy, they look at us eating hamburger as, oh my God, you don't eat cows, right? But then other cultures will eat dog, and they see it as just an acceptable thing. It is completely arbitrary, right? So cultures decide it's okay to eat a rabbit, but it's not okay to eat a cat. Completely arbitrary. So we look at somebody eating, a crocodile or a cat with our cultural goggles on, and we're like, oh my God, that's crazy. That's wrong. That's bad. That's gross. With their looking through their cultural goggles, and that's completely acceptable. And certainly the same applies to everything, to our issues of gender that we were looking at in our first unit, to how we live in our houses, and certainly our death rituals. So it's very difficult to take off our cultural goggles. I first got interested in studying different death rituals when I was in high school, and I was reading this thing about Papua New Guinea, and when the Christian missionaries got there, like most religious missionaries do, all over the planet, is they invade a place and then they tell the native peoples that their traditions are wrong or evil or bad or devil worship or, right? So traditionally in Papua New Guinea, they would practice cannibalism as a death ritual. So immediately that idea is repugnant to us, right? The idea of Mama's dying and we're going to eat her somehow. That seems repugnant. It seems evil. It seems wrong, gross, bad, scary. So in this piece I was reading, the missionary was talking to one of the natives, and he said, well, what do you do with your dead? And the missionary explained, oh, we put them in the ground and we put flowers and we say some holy prayers and we might sing songs. And he said, this is what he said. He said, I would rather be in the warm belly of a friend than in the cold, cold ground. And that was a moment that I was just like, oh, wow. So to him, just casting Mama to the cold and the dark and the worms, and beetles are going to eat her, and she's just going to turn into this rotted, slimy mush, that was barbaric to him. He thought that was cruel. He thought that turning Mama into our actual bones and our muscle and our life force, like she could actually feed our life and become part of our physical bodies, that was beautiful and holy to him, that was a good way to honor her. Totally different worldview, right? But we can only understand that if we take off our cultural training and put on his and try to understand the ritual through his eyes. It's like the Tibetan sky burials. It's one that I'm fascinated by. If you Google this, be aware that the images are graphic. So in the Buddhist tradition, the body's just an empty vessel, right? The soul has gone on. So what is one of the last beneficial things a person could do for the universe is to be useful. So basically they take the body out and feed it to vultures. That idea is horrifying to us. That seems disrespectful and shocking. And how could you just take Mama out and feed her to the vultures? But in in somebody who practices this, in their worldview, this is Mama is giving life to other creatures, that this is the last good thing she could do for the universe. And so it's a beautiful thing. If we're wearing ours, we're like, oh my God, that's horrible. We can't turn her into vulture poo. Or if we eat her, we can't turn Mama into poo. But, if we bury her in the ground, she's just going to be worm poo. So I guess no matter way you do it, we just end up as shit, right? So anyway, we have to really strive. We're going to have these initial reactions that are all sorts of our cultural training, and we have to try to understand it through their point of view. So we're going to look at Mexico's Dia de los Muertos, which is the Day of the Dead. You'll be familiar with that, even if you haven't studied it. I was just in the dollar store today, and they've got Day of the Dead candles and decorations and sugar skull banners. And so we see these things all over the place, even though we may not have an understanding of where they come from, and they may not be our personal, family's traditions. And we're going to look at the Toraja people of Indonesia. So what we're going to do in this is, for your essay, and if you look at the assignment sheet, there's like a general outline. You're going to give an overview of both of these, and you have to be brief because the whole essay is just a couple pages, right? So you can't give us all the details of all the traditions, or else it'll take 2 pages to describe the Dia de los Muertos and 2 pages to describe the Toraja Manene tradition. You have to condense it down. Then you can discuss, okay, well, what's similar about these traditions? What's different about these traditions? And then compare them to our standard kind of modern American embalming and burial traditions. And you'll get into more details in the similarities and differences. When you're looking at these, one thing that I recommend that you compare is looking at these rituals and saying, okay, which aspects of this is done for the sake of the dead and which are done for the sake of the living. So for example, we don't think that in our modern kind of American tradition that if I have this certain tombstone, it'll help Papa get in heaven, right? We don't think that. That was something he needed to take care of when he was alive. That was between him and God, right? We don't think that if I eat these certain foods on this certain night at Papa's grave, it's going to make his spirit happy. We don't think that way. But in other traditions, there are things that the living can actually do to help the passage of the deceased. So things that we feel we're doing to help the actual dead person. And a lot of these things we know were just done for us, right? So when we embalm Mama and put her pretty makeup on and put her in that expensive wood box, we don't think it's actually helping her soul. We don't think it's actually helping her in the afterlife. We brutalize her body and pump her full of poisons and put makeup on her so that she looks good to us, right? We don't think it's actually helping her. But in these other traditions, you'll see that a lot of these actions are thought to actually help the deceased. So that could be something you can compare. So what out of the Mexican and the Indonesian traditions are done for the sake of the dead, which are done for the sake of the living? You can also compare and contrast the use of certain things like, okay, how do they use flowers? How do they use food? How do these things connect them to their ancestry? How do these things connect them to their religion? Are they done on certain nights? Are they things like that? So another thing you could look at also is how these aspects are changing. So you can see a collision of traditions that were pre-Christian, and then when Christianity came in, how did that alter these? What stayed the same? What changed? Etc. So while you're working on this, make sure to remember that if you're using foreign words, not necessarily the name of people, like so the Taraja or Mexican, you don't have to put that in italics, but if you say like Dia de los Muertos or Menene or something like that, you generally italicize those in academic writing. So really be aware of your own responses to this. How are you feeling? Uncomfortable, grossed out, inspired, comforted, intrigued, confused? And, practice that self-awareness of, okay, I think this is, oh my gosh. Okay, well, try to take off how you've been trained and try to envision this through the viewpoint and the worldview of the people who are practicing it, and see if that helps give you a better understanding. I look forward to reading these essays. This video has been way too long. But anyway, yeah, thank you. I look forward to reading these.